It's 1995 in the West African country of Sierra Leone. For 4 years, the country's been torn apart by a brutal civil war between the government and a rebel army called the RUF. And right from the start, the RUF had the upper hand. Sierra Leone's government was drowning in corruption and internal fighting, and the RUF took advantage of that to absolutely destroy their military. Within months, they managed to take control of most of Sierra Leone's diamond mines and started using that money to fund their war. With no way to pay for weapons or training for its army, the government of Sierra Leone was being badly beaten. The RUF showed no mercy as it kept gaining ground. Rebel soldiers would raze entire villages to the ground, torturing and killing anyone who stood in their way. They kidnapped children barely old enough to go to school and forced them to become soldiers, killing and fighting for the same army that murdered their entire families. No one was safe. With the RUF raining terror down on the people of Sierra Leone, the country and the government were on the brink of collapse. No one could help and no one wanted to help. It was too big of a risk. The RUF had become so powerful that the government of Sierra Leone would need a miracle if they wanted to make it out of the war alive. And with the RUF advancing to just 20 miles away from the capital city of Freetown, the Sierra Leone government knew that this was their last chance. They needed a Hail Mary and they needed it now. But who would come to the rescue? Who would be willing to fight on the losing side of a war that was pretty much coming to an end? None of the world governments were interested in getting their hands dirty, so help would have to come from somewhere else. So in desperation, the government approached the one army it knew wouldn't back down from a fight, no matter how brutal. And no, it was not the US military. It wasn't the British Special Forces. It wasn't even the armies of neighboring African countries. No, they weren't interested in fighting someone else's war. No, the Sierra Leone government turned to the army that shot fear through the hearts of anyone who heard their name: Executive Outcomes. The most powerful, effective, and successful private military company to ever exist at that time. Executive Outcomes was unlike any other PMC around back then. They didn't just employ washed-out soldiers or beat cops looking for a little money. No, every member of Executive Outcomes was elite. We're talking about seasoned veterans of African Bush War. The Executive Outcomes soldiers knew the tactics of rebels like the RUF like the backs of their hands, and they were more than willing to take on the challenge of ending Sierra Leone's civil war. Their first goal? Reclaiming Sierra Leone's diamond-rich Kono region. So quietly, a few dozen Executive Outcomes soldiers arrived in the capital of Sierra Leone. They met up with local militias and started training them in modern bush warfare tactics. They even brought in their own planes and helicopters for air support. And then one night in 1995, they attacked. Under the cover of darkness, Executive Outcomes soldiers supported by the militias they trained struck RUF strongholds across the Kono region with surgical precision. Using the element of surprise and the knowledge of guerrilla warfare, they exploited the RUF's overconfidence, and one by one the rebels' defenses fell. For days, the sound of gunfire and explosions was all you could hear, as an army of just a few dozen mercenaries and a couple hundred militia soldiers took on thousands of RUF rebels. No one could have ever expected Executive Outcomes to be this deadly, but they were. Within days, Executive Outcomes had won their first victory. They freed the Kono region from the RUF and returned the diamond mines to the government's control. But they were only getting started. Impressed by their success, the government of Sierra Leone asked them to stay to help them end the war for good. And that's exactly what they did. Working with local aid organizations, Executive Outcomes spent the next few months clearing the RUF out of dozens of towns. They freed child soldiers, protected civilians, and even helped bring medicine and food to starving villages. In Sierra Leone, Executive Outcomes was elevated to hero status. Everyone loved them. And within just over a year, they had beaten the RUF so badly that the rebels were forced to admit defeat. On November 30th, 1996, the RUF signed a peace agreement with the government, bringing more than 5 years of bloodshed and violence to an end. The mercenaries that had been paid to free up the country's diamond mines ended up bringing the entire brutal civil war to an end, while also probably preventing genocide in the process. But it wouldn't last. Under this peace deal, the new government of Sierra Leone had to ask Executive Outcomes to leave, and instead they had to replace them with UN peacekeepers. But unlike Executive Outcomes, the UN peacekeepers had zero understanding of bush warfare. They had no support from the people in the villages and no knowledge of Sierra Leone's terrain. In other words, they were in way over their heads. And the RUF knew it. Less than 5 months after the last Executive Outcomes soldier left Sierra Leone, the RUF came back with a vengeance. They obliterated the peacekeepers' defenses and quickly took back all the ground they had lost to Executive Outcomes. By January 1999, the RUF rebels reached the capital. And that's when they showed the peacekeepers just how brutal they can be. In an attack later named Operation No Living Thing, the RUF entered the capital of Freetown and went on to murder thousands upon thousands of innocent civilians. All the work Executive Outcomes have done, all it has sacrificed and achieved, it was all reversed in less than 6 months. But while Sierra Leone was right back to where it started, Executive Outcomes had just proven themselves as the best of the best, better than the UN peacekeepers themselves. No other private military company on Earth had their success rate or their capabilities. They were a powerful, organized private military for hire, an army that toed the gray line between fighting for good and fighting for money. And although mercenaries have always been around, Executive Outcomes was the godfather of all the modern private military companies that came after them, from Blackwater to the Wagner Group. And their story starts in the last place anyone could ever expect. Not in America, not in Russia, and not even in Great Britain. No, the origin story of Executive Outcomes starts in an underrated, underestimated African country that few people would even give a second thoughts. Stay dangerous, and this is the story of Executive Outcomes. Also, quick update. After launching just mid last year, my beef tallow skincare brand Evil Goods has already transformed the lives of over 100,000 people. And when we say transform, we really do mean transform. Acne that they've tried on everything magically disappears. Eczema, psoriasis gone. And the reason why is simple. When you go from rubbing super toxic skincare products derived from crude oil on yourself every day, and you switch over to something all natural with the best source ingredients like this, you are guaranteed to see some incredible results. Men love it, women love it, parents use it on their kids, and of course I use this every day, and it's the only thing I recommend to my friends and family. It works on your face, lips, body, which is why when people switch over to our Evil Goods Whip Tallow Honey Balm, they end up spending less money compared to having to buy all these super toxic skincare products. We just launched a new citrus scent. This is my new favorite. It's made with quality lemongrass essential oil, and it's a light smell that isn't overpowering. Our special formula is made with only the highest quality ingredients, from grass-fed, grass-finished USA tallow, Manuka honey, one of the most expensive and effective honeys in the world for healing, all whipped up to perfection. So click the link below right now and pick up a jar for yourself and your family now. We guarantee you'll never go back, so click the link below to buy a jar now. At the peak of apartheid in South Africa, no other country on the continent had a more effective military. After years of fighting wars in Namibia and Angola, South Africa's military had become as powerful as it was brutal. The military had dozens of secret units filled with tough men who were willing and able to do anything to carry out their commands. But then as the end of apartheid in South Africa drew near, all those elite units were slowly dissolved. And when South Africa's war in Angola and Namibia also came to an end, the South African Defense Force decided it was time to scale down. It didn't need so many special units anymore, which meant thousands of soldiers were gonna be left without jobs. And one of those soldiers was Eeben Barlow. Eeben Barlow was as tough as they came, and by the mid-1980s, he had worked his way up the military ranks to become a commander of South Africa's feared 32nd Battalion. And later he became a commander of the Super Secret Civil Corporation Bureau, or CCB. The CCB was the apartheid government's favorite death squad, so when apartheid began falling apart, the CCB was one of the first units in the military to go. There was no use for these killers in the new governments, so suddenly Eeben Barlow found himself without a job. Like thousands of other South African soldiers, war and violence was all he knew. It was all he was good at. How was a guy like him gonna adapt to an office job? So Barlow started looking for something he could do to make use of all these military skills he had. He had lots of other military friends with the same problem, and that's when he got an idea. Here was an opportunity to give all these ex-soldiers a second chance to do what they do best, while making a ton of money. See, what if instead of fighting for a country or a government, what if he started a private military company instead? A company that had all the abilities of a real military, but without all the hidden agendas and patriotism. A private military company where the only goal is to make money and complete their missions as quickly and effectively as possible. See, this was back in the late 1980s, and during this time, dozens of other African countries were also struggling with their own civil wars, rebellions, and terrorism. Most of these countries had just spent the last 100+ years colonized, and when their European colonizers finally left, they took everything of value with them. So these countries didn't have money or expertise to fight these wars themselves, and it's not like they could ask for outside help. If they asked the West to get involved, they would be at risk of getting played by them again. And that's if they were even interested in helping them in the first place. No foreign government wants to send its military to some godforsaken country to protect human rights or whatever. Military casualties don't really make for a great re-election campaign, so foreign governments were out. But PMCs? PMCs didn't care about politics or casualties. All they cared about was balancing the risk with the right price. And after years of fighting for a country that just dropped him the minute he wasn't needed anymore, getting paid handsomely to fight seemed like the perfect setup for Eeben Barlow. So in 1989, Eeben Barlow and some of his colleagues officially set up Executive Outcomes, and they got started recruiting. A private military company is only as good as the mercenaries and employees. Eeben Barlow knew that all too well. So when the time came for him to build his team, he turned to the people he trusted most, his fellow soldiers. These were the guys that fought alongside him, but now they found themselves jobless and struggling. Barlow promised to change that. Like him, these soldiers spent their entire adult lives in war. They didn't know anything other than fighting. There was no way they could ever adjust to working a regular 9 to 5. Just imagine you're an Iraq or Afghanistan vets. You've got all this experience, all the skill, but you're done getting paid $30,000 a month for risking your life. You're done fighting in wars you don't agree with. You're done fighting for a country that would leave you homeless and unemployed on a moment's notice. But maybe you've just been discharged over something like your mental stability or a small little injury. What's next, being a mall cop? Or a bodyguard for some stuck-up celebrity? No way. And that is where PMCs come in. They offer something everyone wants, real money. Ex-Navy SEALs can make up to $10,000 a day working in the Middle East, while even regular mercenaries can earn anything between $9,000 and $22,000 a month. That's the kind of money that makes a real difference. Solid salaries, danger pay, a chance to do what you do best for no one else's benefit but your own, or even the chance to get back into a fight that you believe in. That's the allure of working for a PMC. And that's how Eeben Barlow got his very first unit of South African soldiers to sign up for executive outcomes. He reached out to his old teammates and offered them the job of a lifetime. No more forced deployments, no more living paycheck to paycheck, no more fighting for a cause you didn't believe in. Join executive outcomes, and you get to be in it for yourself, no one else. So unsurprisingly, dozens of South African ex-soldiers from the most battle-hardened units were interested. And once they were recruited, he managed them with the same tough, no-nonsense attitude he had while in the military. Executive Outcomes' unofficial motto became fit in or which was a great way to remind his recruits that the only people they had to be loyal to was to each other. There was no patriotism, no civil duty, no moral obligation deciding what they did anymore. All they had was the money and each other. And now with the team assembled, it was time for Eeben Barlow to start looking for clients. It's 1991 and the De Beers Mining Company was in big trouble. Its precious diamond mines in Namibia and Botswana are being threatened by criminal gangs, and regular security wasn't gonna cut it. They needed serious help and firepower, so they turned to executive outcomes. Back then, the PMC wasn't big enough to get on any big government's radar yet, but soon enough, they did such a great job in Botswana that a whole list of other businesses started noticing their success. One of the first companies to hire executive outcomes after its debut was an oil mining business in Angola, a country ripped apart by a bloody civil war that continued on and off since 1975. And in 1992, the fighting stopped just long enough for Angola to finally hold democratic elections. The MPLA party won the elections fair and square, but unfortunately its opposition, known as the UNITA, were really sore losers. They refused to accept the results of the election and reignited the war all over again. Backed by a bunch of other African countries, the UNITA rebels made quick work of the Angolan government's defenses. And by January 1993, they had nearly taken over the entire country, including the oil-rich region of Soyo. Things were getting out of hand. Just like in Sierra Leone, Soyo was the Angolan government's biggest cash cow, and without it they faced near certain defeat. Something had to be done. But luckily for the government, one of the oil companies that operated in Soyo was Heritage Oil and Gas, owned by two British businessmen, Tony Buckingham and Simon Mann. And these guys were not about to let some rebel fighters steal all their oil profits. They had heard about executive outcomes work in Botswana and figured it was time to see what they could do under real wartime conditions. At first, Heritage Oil thought the PMC would say no. South Africa used to be an ally to UNITA, and lots of executive outcome mercenaries fought alongside the rebels at some point in their military careers. But as it turns out, executive outcomes wasn't in the business of being picky about clients. Money talks, and these oil guys were offering a whole lot of it. So with the Angolan government's blessing, 60 executive outcome mercenaries touched down just north of Soyo on February 16, 1993. Backed by 1,300 Angolan troops, their mission was clear: get rid of the 3,000 UNITA rebels holed up in the city by whatever means necessary. It didn't matter that the executive outcomes force had less than half the number of men on the rebel side. Thanks to all the years of fighting side by side, they knew UNITA's playbook inside and out. And in less than 6 weeks, they had recaptured Soyo and its oil fields. Think about it, in the space of 6 weeks, a relatively unknown private military company had done what would have taken the National Army years, if they even succeeded in the first place. Simon Mann and the Angolan government became executive outcomes' biggest fans. The government was so impressed by the PMC's ability to turn the tide of war that it couldn't help wondering, if executive outcomes could remove UNITA from Soyo, couldn't they get rid of UNITA from the entire country once and for all as well? The PMC finally had its foot in the door, and it was more than willing to try its hand at bringing a nearly 20-year-long civil war to an end, for the right price of course. With the oil fields of Soyo back under government control, money started flowing back into their coffers. And since none of it would have been possible without executive outcomes, the Angolan government had no hesitations. The Angolan government asked them to stick around, even if it cost them $40 million a year, or around $84 million today. It was obvious that the Angolan army was nowhere near strong enough to take on UNITA alone, so keeping the PMC on their payroll was their only hope for peace. And just like in Soyo, executive outcomes wasted no time preparing themselves and the Angolan military to go on the offensive. First, they whipped the Angolan army into shape, training them in bush and guerrilla warfare, while supplying them with newer, better weapons and military equipment. But that's not all. Executive outcomes wasn't just there to teach and advise. Its mercenaries in Angola were here as a force multiplier, the army's secret weapon when things got tough.
Mercenaries, we're first of all contracted by a national government. We become part of their armed forces, we wear their uniforms, we follow their procedures and guidelines. We fall under the legal regulations of that country. So in other words, we serve that country that contracts us.
And they were really good at it. One US defense expert went so far as to say that executive outcomes, quote, was the best $50 to $60 million the Angolan government spent, end quotes. UNITA did not stand a chance against a well-trained Angolan army backed by a couple hundred elite soldiers, helicopters, and planes. By November 1994, UNITA was beaten so badly that it was forced to come to the negotiating table and agree to peace. For a minute, it looked like Angola could finally put all the violence and war behind it. But as soon as things started to quiet down, the West suddenly became very interested in Angola and its politics. Maybe they were worried about executive outcomes' influence over the Angolan government. Or maybe they just didn't like that there was another military in town helping African countries achieve peace. The West were the only ones that were supposed to be exploiting these countries. But now executive outcome poses a threat. The West could lose its influence over Africa, so it decided to get back into the game.
The World Bank and the IMF, however, put pressure on them to get rid of us so that the UN and other foreign forces could come in. And in both instances, both those countries returned to war.
As soon as the peace agreement was signed, the West began pressuring the Angolan government to get rid of executive outcomes. They're not soldiers, they're mercenaries. How could you trust some guns for hire with the safety of your entire country? Eventually, America put so much pressure on the Angolan government that Angola had to ask executive outcomes to leave. The PMC warned the government over and over again that things would only get worse if they left, but it didn't matter. America has spoken, and since executive outcomes had already been paid, when his contract finally ran out, they had no choice but to pack up and leave. To replace the PMC, the UN sent more than 7,000 peacekeeper officers to Angola in 1995. It ended up costing more than $1.5 billion to keep the UN peacekeepers in Angola for just 4 years. That works out to about $375 million a year, which is almost 10 times the amount executive outcomes charged. So obviously the UN peacekeepers probably did a 10x better job, right? I mean, executive outcomes only had a few hundred men in the country, and the UN had over 7,000. That's not even mentioning all the fancy tech and weapons the UN obviously had. Well, as it turns out, the best people to use in African guerrilla warfare are Africans who have actually fought in guerrilla wars before. Not a random mix of 7,000 bleeding heart humanitarians who don't even know how bush wars work. By 1996, the last executive outcome soldiers left Angola, and under the UN's expert guidance, it took less than a year for Angola to descend into all-out war again.
However, the UN has actually sat and watched people being slaughtered and not gone to their rescue. And I find as any force claiming to be there to ensure peace, I think these actions are despicable. I cannot understand how people can claim that they want to secure peace and bring about peace when they watch people being slaughtered. And people cannot tell me that the area is too big to control. That is absolute nonsense. And if people say that, they are really trying to cover their own inability to do their jobs.
In the space of just 6 months, UNITA rebels had taken over half of the country and forced 200,000 Angolans to flee their homes. Angola was right back to where it started, except this time with much more bloodshed. But the same couldn't be said for executive outcomes. The UN failing where they had succeeded was probably the best advertising they could have ever asked for, and before long another African country reached out for their help. When the government of Sierra Leone reached out to executive outcomes in 1995, their mission was simple: do for us what you did for Angola. But this time the stakes were higher. The RUF rebels weren't just tough, they were ruthless. They killed, tortured, violated human rights without hesitation. They even murdered their own people. Executive outcomes was in for its toughest fight yet. And if it was gonna put that much on the line, well, it was only fair if the government did so too, right? And so Eeben Barlow did a little thinking. In Angola, executive outcomes had needed money up front to cover its expenses. But this time around though, the company had more than enough money to get its men and equipment into Sierra Leone. It didn't need to get paid right away, which meant it didn't need to lower its fees just so the government of Sierra Leone could afford them. This time around, Eeben Barlow was gonna play the long game, and he was gonna make a whole lot of money from it. Remember Simon Mann and Tony Buckingham, the two British guys who owned Heritage Oil in Angola? Well, after executive outcomes got them their mine back, they were so happy with the service that they stayed in touch. And when Sierra Leone came asking for a miracle, Eeben Barlow realized that his friendship with Simon and Tony could be the key to unlimited riches. So Eeben, Tony, and Simon set up their proposal to the government of Sierra Leone. For a tiny fee of $1.8 million a month, a tiny fraction of what they usually charge, executive outcomes would come in and rid the country of the RUF for good. $1.8 million would be just enough to cover their expenses, with a little to spare. The government of Sierra Leone was ecstatic. At $1.8 million a month, they would be paying almost half of what the company charged Angola per year. Talk about a bargain. But executive outcomes wasn't done yet. We know you can't afford more than that right now, but do you know what you can afford? Giving us some of those diamond mines you got over there. Executive outcomes knew that the government of Sierra Leone had no choice but to say yes. If they didn't, the RUF would have control of the diamond mines, and the government would never see a cent of it. At least this way they could stay alive and they could still keep the other mines that they had. So they agreed. This small change in the payment terms revolutionized the business of private military companies. Where Eeben Barlow could have made $40 million a year before, minus costs and all of that, now the government was literally covering his expenses while he got a juicy cut of all the diamond mines. And suddenly, executive outcomes' potential client list wasn't just limited to countries with enough cash on hand to pay them. Oh, you don't have the money to pay us right now? Don't worry. Just sign over your diamond mines, gold mines, oil, or whatever, and we'll take care of it. It was a genius business move. Just like in Angola, executive outcomes came in and absolutely destroyed the RUF. And on the surface, the PMC looked like the hero, handing out food and saving children from being forced to become soldiers. While simultaneously, Eeben Barlow and his executives were raking in some well-deserved cash. And when, just like in Angola, the West forced them out and replaced them with UN peacekeepers, it didn't matter. Executive outcomes may have been kicked out, but Simon and Tony's mines were still going strong, which meant Barlow was still profiting. Eeben Barlow had taken PMCs to a whole new level. He had turned being a mercenary into a well-oiled money-making machine. But the more the company grew, the more attention it drew. And for a business that makes profit from war, attention was the last thing it needed. By 1997, Executive Outcomes was the biggest, baddest, best-known PMC company in existence. For governments in need of guns for hire, Executive Outcomes was the only option. No one did it better or had a higher success rate. And business was booming. But so was the public's interest in what exactly the company did and how it got paid for it. Executive Outcomes was about to learn how having such a notorious reputation also had its downsides. See, like all the other African countries Executive Outcomes had operated in 1997 the small island nation of Papua New Guinea was in the middle of a civil war. Papua New Guinea is located just above Australia and next to Indonesia. And it was the same old story. Rebels fighting against inexperienced government soldiers and turning the entire country into a battlefield. Desperate, the government of Papua New Guinea turned to a PMC known as Sandline International for help. Sandline International was pretty new in the game, but that didn't mean it wasn't well connected, because one of the founders of Sandline was none other than our guy Simon Mann. On top of that, Sandline International also shared an office building with the headquarters of Heritage Oil and Gas, and another mining company called Branch Energy. According to some, Sandline and Executive Outcomes has something of a joint venture between them. Pretty convenient considering Sandline and Executive Outcomes would do the dirty work, while Heritage Gas and Branch Energy would reap the rewards. So when the government of Papua New Guinea came knocking, Sandline International pulled in Executive Outcomes to help. If their operation was successful, the government promised to let them buy out one of the country's most valuable copper mines, which would mean hundreds of millions of dollars of profit over the next few years. For Executive Outcomes, it was supposed to be business as usual. They would go in, train the army, bring in new weapons, assist in a few missions, and that would be that. Except this wasn't an African country they were dealing with, and the reaction to Papua New Guinea using mercenaries to win a war would be very different to what the company had come to expect. On February 7, 1997, the first Executive Outcomes mercenaries started training the government forces. The deal between the government and Sandline was supposed to be top secret. So secret that not even the head of the Papua New Guinea Defense Force knew exactly why the mercenaries were there. But somehow, news of Executive Outcomes' arrival in Papua New Guinea was leaked to the press, including mentions of how the government had promised Sandline the right to buy their copper mine. The people of Papua New Guinea were furious, and so was everyone else. Even though Papua New Guinea had asked Australia and a bunch of other countries for help, they all said no. But now all these same countries were suddenly very opinionated about how Papua New Guinea had to resort to mercenaries. Suddenly, every move executive outcomes had ever made was under a microscope. They're gonna steal all our natural resources or commit war crimes. They're not here for anything except money. The accusations just kept coming in. It got so bad that even the National Army turned against the government and executive outcomes. They arrested all the mercenaries on the land and deported them back to their countries of origin. While every newspaper was filled with stories about how companies like executive outcomes were destroying democracy. It didn't matter that when it came down to it, even the moral armies of the West did the exact same thing. What, you think the US military really thought Iraq had weapons of mass destruction? You really thought they were spreading democracy in every other country the West has been involved in? At least with executive outcomes, the terms are clear and the price is fair. There's no hidden colonialism happening here. And just like the West, South Africa's military never really liked the idea of a private company being better at war than they were. And all the bad press about executive outcomes wasn't exactly great for a government that was still trying to recover from its apartheid-era reputation. So when the operation in Papua New Guinea blew up in executive outcomes' face, they used it as the perfect excuse to start targeting the PMC back home. Executive Outcomes' public image was transformed from a company that ended wars to a bunch of greedy monsters who killed for profits. And in 1998, the South African government passed a new law to regulate private military companies. Basically, companies like Executive Outcomes would now need the government's stamp of approval before taking on any foreign contracts. And given all the trouble Executive Outcomes was in, it was very unlikely the government would approve any of their contracts for the foreseeable future. So the company did the only thing it could given the circumstances. It shut down. Eeben Barlow resigned from Executive Outcomes in 1997. Even before the government decided to regulate the industry, he knew the company's reputation had gone too far down the drain to salvage. But that didn't mean he left the business for good. Mercenaries and soldiers of fortune have been around since the beginning of wars, and these guys are notoriously thick-skinned, so it wasn't long before he was back in the game. This time he joined a company called Step International. According to the company's official website, it specializes in training and advising foreign militaries, intelligence, and law enforcement agencies. In other words, the exact same thing Executive Outcomes used to do, just minus the global infamy. But Step wasn't the only PMC to follow Executive Outcomes' business model.
Many companies have tried to clone Executive Outcomes, not only the Russian company. Companies in the West have tried to clone Executive Outcomes and have admitted to that.
And today, the industry is worth at least $100 billion. But let's be real, who knows what the real number is if we count all the under-the-table deals, from mines and natural resources. And business is only getting bigger. In 2020, more than 22 years after Executive Outcomes closed, Eeben Barlow resigned from Step and announced that he was bringing the company back to life. The godfather of PMCs is back in the game. And for now, it seems like he's learned from his mistakes and has taken all his operations underground. Today, more than 4 years after the company's revival, no one really knows what Executive Outcomes is doing, where they're operating, or who they're working for. And you want to know what's also as controversial as private military companies? Professional pillow fighting.
Jumping around like that. Headshot. Pulling it. Threesome, a practitioner.
Yes, you heard that right. There is now a professional pillow fighting league called the PFC, and it's exactly what it sounds like. And you can watch the world's first ever documentary on the PFC that I've helped make right now for free on a brand new channel called Unexpected. Unexpected is a channel that I'm partnered with that's made by the same producer behind the Netflix top 10 docuseries called Gunther's Millions. Now he's on a mission to bring these Netflix level documentaries on the world's most unexpected subjects directly to you for free on YouTube. So click the card on the screen or click the link below to watch the strange world of pillow fighting right now. It's raw, it's ridiculous, and you're not gonna regret it. So click the card on the screen or click the link below to watch now, and don't forget to subscribe.